Welcome back to the Career Profiles podcast. I'm your host, Sean, and we are back for another episode, the final episode and the final story of 2025. If you haven't heard the previous podcast recently, I was talking about what this final podcast would be, and ultimately it was a decision that I made a couple of months ago when thinking about episodes to do for Career Profiles this year and which ones would be good for people to listen to. And a couple of years ago, me and Johnston did a revamped version of the Muhammad Ali story because that was the first episode we ever did. And as I've said previously, we did it based upon knowledge alone and a little bit of information, whereas over time when our storytelling process developed, the research got better, we got better at delivering. It got to the point where we was believing that actually we should do some of these episodes again because we can do a much better job the second time around. So with the addition of Hassan to Team BTR, we've now put together our career profile on Mike Tyson. Multiple parts on Mike Tyson's career and his life. So many different elements to it, of course. This being the first part, the early years of Mike Tyson. Now, before I get into the episode, as always, please make sure you've subscribed to us on any available podcasting app out there. If you don't follow us on social media, you can do at BTR Boxing Podcast, available on all social media channels as well. So, without further ado, I'm going to get into part one of Mike Tyson's career profile, and it starts on a hot, muggy day in the summer of 1966. An 8-pound baby was born named Michael Gerard Tyson on the 30th of June in Cumberland Hospital. Mike was the third child of Lorna Tyson and Jimmy Kirkpatrick. Lorna Tyson, born Lorna Smith somewhere in the South in 1930, relocated to Brooklyn after World War II. She married Purcell Tyson when she was very young, but they were subsequently divorced. Lorna never remarried, but she always needed a man in her life, earning her a reputation for being promiscuous as well as being alcohol dependent. She met and moved in with a big boisterous labourer named Jimmy Kirkpatrick, who, according to Mike, may have been a drug dealer and a pimp. Kirkpatrick reportedly had fathered 16 children with various women, 3 of them with Lorna. Rodney, 5 years older than Mike, Denise, 1 year older than Mike, and of course Mike himself. She took the Kirkpatrick name even though she never married Jimmy, and after Jimmy was hospitalised with a heart condition and subsequently deserted her and the children before Mike was born, she brought home a new boyfriend, Edward Gillison. As Mike Tyson would note in later years, it was a dysfunctional family. One of Lorna's boyfriends beat her up one day, but was soon forgiven when he returned to the apartment with liquor and cigarettes. Another boyfriend was thrown out of the apartment after he tried to molest Denise. Ultimately, Lorna Tyson deserved better than life in the ghetto. The 36-year-old single mother had her problems, but she combed her Brooklyn neighbourhood in search of opportunity, only to find, like thousands before her, nothing but poverty and misery in the segregated sewers of the great northern city. With no man to bring home a regular paycheck, she was forced to subside as best as she could on public assistance. Still, in spite of the poverty and violence that dominated her world, she was able to provide the strong mother image that seemed to be the nucleus of so many black urban families in the 1960s and 70s. One of Mike Tyson's friends said Lorna was a very tough lady, given to violent outbursts, and he kept his distance from her. Be that as it may, Lorna Tyson made a superhuman effort to shield her children from the evil outside influences that pervaded the crime-ridden New York City suburb. But her efforts on behalf of the children were only partially successful. Rodney and Denise survived the violence that was part of their life in Brownsville, but young Mike was not as fortunate. When he passed his 5th birthday, the youngest member of the Tyson clan was cut loose from his mother's apron string and cast adrift on the sea of life. The first few years were a painful, humiliating journey for the youngster. Every morning he kissed his mother goodbye and set out with his brother Rodney for school. The classroom instruction was strange and frightening to young Mike, but he eagerly tried to adapt to the new environment and school structure. He struggled with reading, writing, and the rudiments of mathematics, leaving him frustrated and bewildered. School was a definite learning experience, But it was outside school, in the schoolyards and the streets, where Mike's real education began. In his early school years at Bedford-Stuyvesant, he was unhappy. He was a timid, chubby little kid with eyeglasses who spoke softly and lisped. He was one of the poorest kids in a poor neighbourhood. His clothes were always ragged and dirty, and his shoes bore holes worn through by previous owners. His small size and sensitive nature made him the perfect target for the self-appointed school toughs, particularly the 5th and 6th graders who were grooming themselves for membership in the neighbourhood street gangs. It was during this period that Mike first heard the taunts of little fairy boy along the school corridors and on the sidewalks of Brooklyn. He was also called Bummy Mike by the arrogant Brooklyn bullies. Many days after school, the belligerated 6-year-old would run back to the safety of his apartment with tears streaming down his face and would cower in a corner until his mother came home to comfort him. One time, a boy took his milk and his glasses, drank the milk and dropped the glasses into a gas tank of a parked truck. In 1976, the Tyson family then moved cross town, 4 blocks to be exact, to the Brownsville section of Brooklyn. Brownsville was the stereotypical slum, a barren, battered battle zone of abandoned cars, junk-filled fields and garbage-strewn streets. Desolate tenements stood like toy soldiers, cold and forlorn, their plastic-covered windows and boarded-up doors casting a pall over the inner city. Periodically, the silence was broken by the piercing wail of a siren. Here, a police cruiser responded to an armed robbery in the progress. There, an ambulance arrived to remove the body of a dead prostitute from Lincoln Terrace Park. Brownsville became Mike Tyson's hometown. His first home on Howard Street was a squalid, rat-infested hovel without heat or running water. Obscenities decorated the walls and stairwells of the building. Garbage littered the floor. When summer came, the stench from decaying matter became almost unbearable. Lorna Tyson tried her best to preserve a semblance of dignity within the family, but the falling plaster, the broken windows, the roaches and rats fought her every step of the way. Within months, the building was condemned. It was eventually demolished to make way for a new housing development, and the uprooted Tyson clan moved again, this time to 178 Amboy Street, apartment 2A nearby. As tough as Bed-Stuy was, Brownsville was 10 times worse. In fact, it was said that Brownsville made Bedford-Stuyvesant look like Beverly Hills. The taunts of little fairy boy became louder and more frequent in Mike's new school, and the bullying and the physical beatings became a daily routine. His journeys to Hopkinton Playground were often interrupted by local bullies who stole his possessions, then beat him up and chased him home, dirty, crying and bleeding. It was about this time that Mike developed an interest in pigeons, commonly known as street rats, as an escape from the squalid world that awaited him in the streets below. Many of the city kids took up the hobby of raising pigeons on the rooftops of Brooklyn to take them away from the dirt and clamour of the city sidewalks and free them from the dangers that lurked in every alleyway and around every corner. Mike captured some pigeons in the city park, stole money from someone's house to buy other pigeons, and built a wooden coop atop the old Vanderbilt Hotel to house them. In time, he assembled a family of almost 100 of the loving birds. When he was with his pigeons, Mike's innate gentle nature surfaced, and he was at peace with the world. He would sit with his pigeons for hours talking to them and sending them skyward to fly in peace over the squalor of the city. When they were sick, he would nurse them, and when it was cold, he would move them inside. Unfortunately, the interludes with his feathered friends were much too short, and the time spent on the sidewalks of Brooklyn was much too long. The quagmire of the ghetto dragged him inexorably downward to a life of violence and petty crime. Young Mike Tyson was not yet 11 years old when his life changed abruptly, thrusting him into the depraved world of the inner city. By this time, he'd filled out physically, and he was bigger than most boys his age. He was short but stocky, with a thick neck and broad shoulders, but he still had a gentle and passive nature, and an inferiority complex to match. That changed quickly when 2 of the neighbourhood bullies invaded his rooftop domain and stole one of his so-called street rats. Mike yelled for help. He said, "Mummy, please, they're taking my birds." Mike called his mum for help. One guy took the bird, and he just ripped open the neck, and he put the bird in Mike's face. Somebody said, "Mike, fight him." and Mike started to fight. For the first time in his life, he attacked someone with his fists. The violent force of clenched fist against bare skin and bone felt good, and it started the adrenaline flowing. His body exploded with a burst of energy, and he hit the boy again, and again, and again, releasing years of frustration. The older boy backed off, not knowing what to make of this little monster he'd set loose. Mike struck again. His fist crashed against the bigger boy's face. Blood spurted from the boy's mouth. Another punch smashed the boy's nose, breaking it. The boy tried to fight back. He flailed away at the half-crazed boy, but Mike walked right through his punches and continued to batter him with both hands. Finally, the thief had enough and fled, leaving young Tyson bloody and breathing hard, but fully satisfied. So it was at this moment that Mike had discovered the love of fighting. And of course, things would just never be the same for him again. He enjoyed the physical contact, the one-on-one confrontation. Daily fights then became second nature to him. Fights with fists, sticks, bricks, or even knives. It didn't make any difference to him. Physical encounters became part of Mike's new world. He himself estimated that he had as many as 7 fights a day. One morning, Mike woke up to find that his favourite pigeon, Julius, had died. He planned to bury Julius, but when he went inside to get something, a sanitation worker took the crate containing the pigeon and put it in the crusher in the garbage truck. An enraged Tyson raced to the scene, too late to recover Julius. So he took his frustration out on the sanitation worker, knocking him out cold with one punch. And in 1976, a crew called the Cats that Mike was hanging with was having some beef, as they would call it, with these guys called the Puma Boys, who were from the same neighbourhood. Mike's crew was a burglary team, and some of the gangster friends had an altercation with these Puma Boys, so they were going to the park to back them up. They normally didn't deal with guns, but these were their friends, so they stole a pistol, a .357 Magnum, and a long M1 rifle with a bayonet attached from World War I. Mike said, "You never knew what you'd find when you broke into people's houses." So they were walking through the streets, holding the guns, and nobody ran up on them. No cops were around to stop them. They didn't even have a bag to put the big rifle in, so they just took turns carrying it every few blocks. Mike's friend Ron said, "Yo, there he goes, the guy with the red Pumas and the red mock neck." Ron had spotted the guy they were after. When they started to run, the huge crowd in the park opened up like Moses parting the Red Sea. It was a good thing they did because, boom, one of Mike's friends opened fire. Everybody scrambled when they heard the gun. They kept walking, and he realised that some of the Puma Boys had taken cover between the parked cars in the street. Mike had the M1 rifle, and he turned around quickly to see this big guy with his pistol pointing towards him. "What the fuck are you doing here?" the guy said to Mike. It was his older brother, Rodney. "Get the fuck out of here." Mike walked and left the park and went home. He was just 10 years old. At aged 11, Mike Tyson almost lost his life. He entered an apartment only to find the occupant still inside. The enraged man was waiting for him, pistol in hand. Mike bolted like a young colt, and as he raced for freedom, a shot rang out, and a .22 slug whistled past his head, narrowly missing him. Mike felt a sense of relief and elation as he flirted with death and came away unscathed. The following night, he was back on the streets again, in search of more excitement. Mike's education immediately took a new turn. Instead of math, he learned the art of picking pockets from the experts. He learned to size up a prospective victim to determine where his valuables were hidden. He became adept at selecting an optimum location to commit the act, a location that was crowded and noisy so the victim wouldn't notice the delicate feel of his wallet leaving his pocket. Denise once boasted that her brother was the best thief in New York. Rodney tried to qualify that statement. He said that Mike had been volatile since his encounter with the pigeon thief, but that as long as he was doing something with his hands beside putting them in other people's pockets, his family was happy. Unfortunately, Mike was headed down a different path. When he decided on a criminal career, he dedicated himself completely to learning his trade. This ability to make a commitment to a goal and follow it through to completion would be a key ingredient in Mike's quest for boxing's heavyweight championship years later. But for now, he mastered the art of mugging from a professional standpoint, learning to rob people at knife point and vanish from the scene almost instantly. Now, as strange as this may sound to the average person, these were actually special years in the life of Mike Tyson. For him, there were years filled with pain and violence, but there were also years of happiness and satisfaction. As Mike Tyson grew in size, he became a leader in the neighbourhood. He was no longer the victim. Now he was the aggressor. He wasn't called Little Fairy Boy or Bummy Mike anymore. Now he was addressed as Mr. Mike Tyson. He no longer wandered helplessly through his environment. Now he controlled it. At 12 years old, Mike Tyson owned Rockaway Avenue and nearby Bristol Park. He ran with a tough crowd, and he was the meanest of the lot. In his few short years as a juvenile delinquent, he developed an all-consuming attraction to danger and fascination with living on the edge. He enjoyed fighting, and he was thrilled by the excitement of armed robberies and police chases. Now that he was the king of Brownsville, he felt like a true warrior, wild and free at last. Although he had become highly respected and feared in this jungle that was Brownsville, the rest of his world was collapsing around his ears. His newfound prosperity, the compensation for his clandestine activities, was immediately evident to his mother. Loose money, new clothes, and gaudy jewellery were obvious signs that not all was well in the Tyson household. Mike's mother couldn't understand her son's newfound way of life. She tried everything she could to dissuade him from his criminal pursuits. She cried whenever he came home with some ill-gotten gain from his evening's enterprise. She begged him to get away from the gang that was corrupting his life. She said, "How can you steal? I've never stole anything in my life." Lorna was afraid that some night Mike might either kill somebody or be killed himself. She also warned him of the inevitable consequences of his actions and threatened him with the juvenile authorities if he didn't reform. But all her attempts to reach her son fell on deaf ears. Mike was determined to keep the respect and friendship of the gang members, even if he had to sacrifice his family to do it. He became more distant from his mother as time passed, withdrawing into a shell and displaying a sullen and hostile facade to the outside world. Lorna Tyson had lost her son, at least temporarily. Years later, after Lorna had passed away, Mike remembered, with regret, his failure as a son. He said, "I never saw my mother happy with me and proud of me for doing something. She only knew me as being a wild kid running the streets, coming home with new clothes she knew that I didn't pay for. I never had a chance to talk to her about it. It's crushing, emotionally and personally." Young Mike Tyson's world had become a sordid excursion into the seamy side of life. As a frequent late-night habitué of the neighbourhood parks and playgrounds, the young thug witnessed stabbings, beatings and rapes, things that most American youngsters can't even relate to. While the majority of teenagers around the country were fascinated by the violent police shows on television, Mike Tyson was witnessing the gore and bloodshed firsthand. Violence and death became a way of life for him before he'd even reached puberty. As the months passed, the Tyson name began to appear on the local police blotter. The desk sergeant at the 73rd Precinct knew him well, as did the cops at the Alamo, or 77 Precinct. He was arrested for the first time when he was 12 years old for stealing purses on Pitkin Avenue. After a short period of confinement, he was remanded into the custody of his mother. But Mike Tyson's police record continued to grow. Assault with a deadly weapon, mugging, burglary, resisting arrest. Mike's name was becoming familiar to all the law enforcement agencies around Brooklyn. He was frequently detained in local juvenile detention centres for short periods of time in an attempt to make him see the error of his ways. Then he was returned to his mother. Finally, after one particularly violent crime, he was sent uptown to Spofford Juvenile Centre in the Bronx. Spofford became like a timeshare for him because he used to go in and out of Spofford. During one of his visits, they were all brought to the assembly room where they watched a movie called The Greatest about Muhammad Ali. When it was over, they all applauded and were shocked when Ali himself walked out onto the stage. He looked larger than life. He didn't even have to open his mouth. As soon as Mike saw him walk out, he thought, "I want to be that guy." Ali talked to them, and it was inspirational. Mike had no idea what he was doing with his life, but he knew that he wanted to be like him. Right there, he decided he wanted to be great. He didn't know how, but it was what he decided that he wanted people to look at him like. He was on the show the same way that they did with Ali. Mike's 8-month stay at Spofford did nothing to rehabilitate him though, and he returned home as hostile as ever. Within weeks, the terror of Brownsville was arrested for armed robbery and was sent back to the juvenile court for the last time. The judge, eyeing the Brooklyn Thug's arrest record that had more than 40 entries, had seen enough of him by this time and decided to teach him a painful lesson, one that would hopefully shock him into turning his life around. Mike Tyson was permanently removed from the custody of his mother and was handed over to the Tryon Division for Youth in Johnstown, New York, a school for juvenile delinquents. Mike's life had reached the bottom rung of the ladder. There was nowhere else to go from this point but up. It was either that or complete self-destruction. The year was 1979, and Mike was now 13 years old. Tryon Division for Youth was for the big boys. They were more hardcore than the guys at Spofford, but Tryon wasn't a bad place. There were a lot of cottages there, and you could walk outside, play basketball, walk to the gym. But Mike got in trouble right away. He was just angry all the time and had that bad attitude. He'd be confrontational and let everyone know that he was from Brooklyn and didn't fuck around with any bullshit. Tyson and another inmate went at each other with fists blazing in a knockdown, drag-out brawl in the quadrangle one day. A confrontation brought on apparently by the other prisoners' refusal to accept Tyson's authority. It took 2 large penal officers to separate the burly Tyson, who was now 5'8" tall and 208 pounds, from his battered opponent. Standing before the director of the facility, still unrepentant, Tyson heard the ultimate punishment meted out: transfer to the Elmwood Cottage. The Elmwood Cottage was the pits, the building where the incorrigibles in the institution were confined. It was popularly referred to as the Bad Boys' Cottage. Here, fate entered the picture, and it took young Tyson by the hand and offered to remove him from the snake pit of despair and set him on the road to a useful life. The hand of fate was assisted by a former professional boxer named Bobby Stewart. Stewart was a counsellor at Elmwood Cottage, and his first glimpse of Tyson sent shivers up his spine. Mike said this in his autobiography, Undisputed Truth. Bobby Stewart was a tough Irish guy, around 170 pounds, who had been a professional boxer. He was a national amateur champ. When I was in the hole, staff members told me there was an ex-boxing champ teaching kids how to box. The staff members that told me about him were very nice to me, and I wanted to meet him because I thought he'd be nice too. I was in my room one night when there was a loud, intimidating knock on the door. I opened the door, and it was Mr. Stewart. "Hey, asshole, I've heard you want to talk to me," he growled. "I want to be a fighter," Mike said. "So do the rest of the guys. But they don't have the balls to work to be a fighter," said Stewart. "Maybe if you straighten up your act and stop being an arsehole and show some respect around here, I'll work with you." So, Mike really started to apply himself. He thought he was the stupidest guy in the world when it came to scholastics, but he got an honour roll star and said yes sir and no ma'am to everyone, just being a model citizen so he could go over to fight with Stewart. It took him a month, but he finally earned enough credits to go. All the other kids came to watch to see if Mike could kick Stewart's ass. Mike was supremely confident that he was going to demolish him and that everyone would suck up to Mike. Mike immediately started flailing and throwing a bunch of punches, and he covered up. He's punching him and he's slugging him, and then suddenly he slips by Mike, Bobby Stewart, and goes boom and hits him right in the stomach. Mike threw up everything he had eaten for the last 2 years. What the fuck was that? He was thinking. He didn't know anything about boxing then. But now he knew that if you get hit in the stomach, you're just going to lose your breath for a couple of seconds, but it comes back. But he didn't know that then. He really thought that he wouldn't be able to ever breathe again and die. He was trying desperately to breathe, but all he could do was throw up. He said it was just horrible shit. Mike had developed a new respect for his instructor as a result of the fight, so he kept his nose to the grindstone, as he had promised, and his reading level soon improved significantly. Stewart, for his part, received permission from the Division for Youth to work with Tyson in the gym 3 nights a week. Tyson was an avid student in the ring and absorbed his lessons quickly and proficiently. Before long, he was breaking through Stewart's guard and causing considerable discomfort to his trainer and mentor. Bobby Stewart realised that he was in a lot of trouble, and he said, "I had to go back into training myself. It was either that or get killed." Even that didn't help for long. Tyson progressed at an amazing rate and soon outgrew his teacher's capabilities to advance his pugilistic talents. He achieved his high level of skill through sheer determination and dedication to the sport. Stewart fondly remembered Tyson's almost fanatical approach to boxing. He said, "I'd show him something at 8 o'clock right before I went home, and someone on the night shift would come back and tell me the next day that they'd have to put him to bed at 3 a.m. He was practicing in the dark. That's how dedicated he was." Another change came over Tyson at Tryon School. He began to take stock of himself and to evaluate his prospects in life. He knew that the first 13 years of his life had been a complete waste, and he knew where that road would lead him if he didn't change. He said, "Whenever I went home to visit all my friends, they were 15 and 16 years old. They were either dead or in jail for the rest of their lives. Either one and nothing less. And I was younger than them. It could have happened to me. It made me realise that life isn't a game. It's survival. It's no fun at all, especially when you're on the losing end." And I wasn't winning. Mike was determined, however, that he would win the battle and not follow the road travelled by his Brooklyn cohorts. Deep down inside, he knew he was destined for something good. He didn't know what it was, but he always knew he would be successful in life. In spite of all his adversity, he still had confidence in himself, and at Tryon, he found that vehicle for survival. The prize ring would be his ticket out of the ghetto, his means of personal salvation. Bobby Stewart looked around for help in developing Mike Tyson's great boxing potential. He immediately thought of Cus D'Amato, an old friend and one of the world's outstanding trainers. D'Amato had a gym in Catskill, New York, 80 miles southeast of Johnstown, where he operated the Catskill Boxing Club while quietly searching for a new world champion. It was mid-1980 when Stewart and Tyson arrived at D'Amato's dingy gym on the 3rd floor of the village building just over the police station on Main Street. When 52-year-old Don Shanagar, an associate of D'Amato's, first caught sight of the 200-pound teenager, he winked at Cus and he whispered, "If this kid is 13 years old, then I'm only 12. This kid's got to be at least 17. I know how these guys are. They say they're younger than they are so they can be treated like juveniles. You can't believe what they say. Look at him. There's no way he's 13. Stewart and Tyson sparred for 3 impressive rounds that day, with Tyson always on the offense and Stewart fending off his furious rushes. Mike kept the pressure on for 3 minutes every round, and Stewart had to fight like hell to survive. In the second round, a Stewart right hand smashed flush against Tyson's nose, splattering blood all over the ring. D'Amato's assistant, Mac Baranski, suggested that the fight be stopped at the end of the round, but Tyson would have none of that. He insisted on finishing out the scheduled 3 rounds. When it was over, Cus D'Amato eyed the young gladiator for a minute, then glanced at Bobby Stewart and smiled. That's the heavyweight champion of the world. If he wants it, it's his. And this is what Mike said about his first meeting with Cus D'Amato. He said, Cus looked exactly like what you'd envision a hard-boiled boxing trainer to look like. He was short and stout, with a bald head, and you could see that he was strong. He even talked tough, and he was dead serious. There wasn't a happy muscle in his face. "How you doing? I'm Cus," he introduced himself. He had a strong Bronx accent. He was with a young trainer named Teddy Atlas. Mike said, "Bobby and I got into the ring and started sparring. I started out strong, really knocking Bobby around the ring. We would usually do 3 rounds, but in the middle of the second round, Bobby hit me in the nose with a couple of rights, and I started bleeding. It didn't really hurt, but the blood was all over my face." "That's enough," Teddy Atlas said. "But sir, please let me finish this round and go one more round. That's what we normally do." "I pleaded," he said. "I wanted to impress Cus." Right after that sparring session, they went to Cus's house for lunch. He lived in a big white Victorian house on 10 acres. You could see the Hudson River from the porch. There were towering maple trees and large rose bushes on the side of the house. Mike had never seen a house like that in his life. Mike said, "We sat down, and Cus told me he couldn't believe that Mike was only 13 years old. And then Cus told Mike what his future would be. He had seen him spar for not even 6 minutes, but he said, in a way, like it was the law, 'You look splendid.' He said, 'You're a great fighter.' It was just compliment after compliment. He also said, 'If you listen to me, I can make you the youngest heavyweight champion of all time. It was a strange feeling for Mike, all these compliments. Like, in Mike's head, it was like, how could he know that sort of shit? Mike actually thought, initially, he was a bit of a pervert. In the world where he came from, people do shit like that when they want to perv out on you. That's what Mike said. Mike didn't know what to say. He'd never heard anyone say nice things about him before. He wanted to stay around this old guy because he liked the way Cus made him feel. Mike later realised that this was Cus's psychology. You give a weak man some strength and he becomes addicted. Now in 1980, Cus suggested that Mike come and live with him and his wife Camille. He said, I think you have the talent to be the heavyweight champion of the world someday. But you've really got to want it. If you wanna, you can stay with me for a couple of weeks and make up your own mind. Then after you gotta get out of Johnstown, you can come here to live and I'll teach you how to be a champion. It's up to you. Mike Tyson came to live at the Ewald house and he spent 2 weeks there during the summer of 1980, getting the feel of the house and the surroundings, getting to know Cus and Camille, and meeting the other fighters who lived in the big house on the river. He also spent a couple of hours a day at the gym working out with the trainer Teddy Atlas, another Cus D'Amato reclamation project. It was a lonely 2 weeks for the 13-year-old Tyson. He didn't mix easily and he didn't trust anybody. He spent most of his time by himself, walking around the large yard or staring out at the scenic Hudson River as it wound its way past the old house, then flowed under the Rip Van Winkle Bridge on its way to the New York Harbour and the Atlantic Ocean. Mike didn't know what to make of Cus, Camille and Teddy. They were, after all, white folks, and Mike came from an all-black environment. He studied them very carefully, but from a distance, and decided he would never trust them too much. But he did like the countryside around Catskill. It was quiet and peaceful, and the hours spent in the gym were exhilarating and rewarding. Mike knew he couldn't go back to Brooklyn when he got out of Johnstown. That would be a ticket to certain oblivion. Mike Tyson wanted, most of all, to be a boxer, and the opportunity appeared to be in Catskill, New York with Cus D'Amato. The one fact that made Mike's final decision easier, even though he thought Cus was a crazy old white dude, he decided to give the old man and Catskill a chance. Maybe things would turn out for the best, and after all, anything was better than Brownsville. Mike Tyson walked through the gates of the Tryon School for Boys one last time in September of 1980. He was released into the custody of Cus D'Amato, who would, a year later, become Tyson's legal guardian. Cus was confident that his protege would one day wear the crown of the heavyweight boxing champion of the world. The old station wagon wheezed and coughed as it made its way down New York Thruway, covering the 80 miles from Johnstown to Catskill in a little less than 2 hours. Teddy Atlas picked Mike up from the station in Catskill and drove to the house. After being welcomed to his new home by Camille, Mike took his duffel bag and made his way up to the narrow stairway, all the way up to the third-floor attic bedroom, which would be his shared living quarters with other boxing hopefuls, Kevin Rooney, Frankie Mincelli, Teddy Atlas, and a former boxer named Jay Bright. Jay had come to the Ewald house almost 13 years before. His 10-year-old heart set on becoming a fighter, but Cus quickly discovered that Jay couldn't move fast enough in the ring, couldn't avoid punches, and couldn't hit hard enough to offset those weaknesses. Jay subsequently retired from the ring to pursue other interests, including acting and teaching. Through Cus, however, he was able to fulfill one of his boyhood dreams. One dreary September afternoon, as the world outside busied itself with the day's activities, Jay Bright climbed through the ropes of a boxing ring for the last time. There, in a small nondescript gymnasium before a sparse gathering of boxers and stragglers, Jay Bright traded punches with his idol, Muhammad Ali. Now, the third-floor bedroom at the Ewald house was a large, austere room with several compact beds strategically located around the perimeter. A regulation-sized pool table dominated the centre of the room, and a Tiffany-style lamp hanging from the ceiling provided adequate lighting for the local hustlers. Large windows, set into 3 of the walls, letting golden streams of sunlight during most of the daylight hours, making the room bright and cheery. A large movie screen blocked one of the windows, and directly across the room from it, a 16mm projector stood at the ready. Dozens of large 16mm film cans were stored haphazardly in a nearby bookcase. Fight films from the private collection of Jim Jacobs, showing most of the famous professional fighters of the past 80 years in action. From the likes of gentleman Jim Corbett to Muhammad Ali, Jim Jacobs had them all. Fight movies were not specifically a mode of entertainment in the old household. They were primarily an educational tool. Almost every night, boxing movies were reviewed in the upstairs bedroom. Many young boxers, not only the residents but also visiting locals, sat huddled around the room, studying the great legends of the sport, while Cus D'Amato pointed out the little nuances that go unnoticed by the general viewing public. They scrutinised each fighter in minute detail to learn how the great champions fought, what style they used, what strategies they utilised, and how they avoided and escaped from physical difficulties. Mike spent his first day of freedom in Catskill strolling around the grounds and generally familiarising himself with the territory. He didn't spend much time with the other fighters, choosing instead the privacy of his own thoughts. In the evening, he puttered around the pool table, playing several games of rotation, trying to adjust to his new surroundings. It was the first day of his new life, and he needed time to think and organise himself. Acceptance, however, would be a long time coming. Tyson's mind was contaminated with the mentality of the streets, built up over a harrowing 13-year period. During that time, he'd developed a prisoner's attitude towards life, sullen, suspicious and hostile. It was a poison that blanketed his mind like a dark cloud, and it would take him a long time to remove, if it could ever be removed. As Cus said many times, a person's bitter and unhappy experiences have to be eliminated layer by layer before the inner person can be revealed. To do that requires the utmost patience. Fortunately for Mike Tyson, Cus was up to the task. Tyson spent weeks observing his white family, always wondering what they were after. He was convinced they would take advantage of him sooner or later if he let his guard down, and he waited for them to make the move. He knew from experience that no one was ever kind to another person without a selfish reason. Everyone had an angle. Throughout the long, lonely days at home and in the gym, the Brooklyn teenager wondered what Cus's angle was. Practically every white person that Mike had ever come into contact with in Brooklyn and in Johnstown was an adversary. That included truant officers, social workers, police officers, lawyers, judges, prison officials, counsellors and guards. They were all out to get him. It seemed obvious to Mike that Cus and Camille were adversaries too. But they wouldn't outwit him, he told himself. He would always be on his guard. His negative attitude resulted in numerous confrontations during his first months in Catskill. He was stubborn and rebellious, and he had to be forced to carry his share of the workload around the house. Camille had to tell him repeatedly to stop eating food with his fingers and to clean his place at the dinner table when he was finished eating. His sloppy living habits, such as leaving his bed unmade in the morning and dropping his dirty clothes on the bedroom floor, brought frequent rebukes from both Cus and Camille, and it was impossible to get Mike to cooperate with the other fighters in sharing the dishwashing responsibilities. It was a critical time in Tyson's life. He could be rescued from his self-imposed emotional prison, or he could plunge deeper and deeper into the abyss of antisocial behaviour. It all depended on how he was handled. Cus D'Amato understood the situation perfectly, having grown up on the streets himself. He had also been through the same situation with Floyd Patterson, as well as with many other fighters whose names have long since been forgotten. Early morning was Mike's favourite time of the day. He was up and out of bed at 5:30 a.m. By 6 o'clock, he and Teddy Atlas were doing the road work. The morning air was crisp in the fall of the year, and it was invigorating to get out of the house and inhale the fresh scents of the river and the countryside. It presented a stark contrast to Mike's boyhood days in Brooklyn, where municipal and industrial pollution hung heavy over the city. A light fog covered the Hudson as the sun came up, and the dew hugged the grass like thousands of tiny crystal beads. At times like these, Mike felt all alone in the world and completely at peace with himself. He liked to run, and the quiet surroundings had a calming influence on him. He thought how nice it would be if he could run forever, and no one could ever bother him again. The dirt road leading away from the U-old house was a desolate at dawn. The only sounds that broke the silence was the rhythmic beating of the two runners and the melodious refrains of the cardinals and robins. Mike normally jogged 2 or 3 miles each morning, just enough to get the adrenaline flowing. The morning run was not a major part of his conditioning program. Its real value was the discipline required to get out of bed at 5:30, sometimes in the dark and long before most people rose to greet the day. After jogging, it was back to the house for a refreshing shower, then nutritious breakfast of ham and eggs or pancakes or hot cereal, often prepared by Cus himself. Tyson's emotional education started early in the day. Cus's lectures began while breakfast was cooking, continued through the meal, and lasted right up until the time that Mike left to catch the bus for school. Mike attended the Catskill public school system and was enrolled in the 8th grade at the Catskill Middle School. He didn't particularly enjoy school, but Cus insisted that he get an education. "Someday," Cus told him, "you're going to be famous and on television, and it's important for you to know how to speak properly. School is important." Despite a major effort on Mike's part to concentrate in school, he still could not wait for the end of the day. As soon as the 2:30 bell rang, Mike was out the door like a shot, racing the 2 miles to Main Street in nothing flat. He spent most of his afternoons at the Catskill Boys Club sharpening his skills at basketball, ping pong and pool. Then at 5:30, it was off to Redmond's Hall and his 2-hour conditioning program in the gym. Mike was placed under the tutelage of Teddy Atlas, who was to be his trainer and confidant during his formative years at the Catskill Boxing Club. D'Amato had the utmost confidence in Teddy's ability to train young fighters in the physical and scientific aspects of the sport, and also to nursemaid them, so to speak, on an emotional level. Teddy was able to relate to boys like Tyson because he too had been an orphan of the streets. Although he was born into a wealthy physician's family in Staten Island, Teddy nonetheless gravitated towards the smouldering social structures of the gutters and alleyways. A jagged 4-inch scar running the length of Teddy's face just behind his left eye was a stark reminder of a juvenile knife fight. Teddy originally came to Catskill in 1976 at the age of 19 to study boxing under the watchful eye of the old master. He was recommended to D'Amato by his boyhood chum Kevin Rooney. Before Cus could begin his rehabilitation program, however, he first had to rescue young Atlas from a Staten Island courtroom where the judge was ready to lock him up and throw away the key. Teddy boxed for Cus for 2 years, went home to Staten Island in 1978, then returned to Catskill 2 years later, more determined than ever to become a professional fighter. Teddy lived at the U-Old house for several years, and Camille noticed a drastic change in his personality during that time. Now, if you want to hear more about Teddy Atlas's story, you can listen to Teddy Atlas's career profile. Also, if you want to hear about more of Cus's story, go and listen to the Cus D'Amato episode as well. Well, Mike Tyson, he loved the gym, and he loved the physical effort in developing his body. He was naturally endowed with a magnificent physique, squat but rippling with muscles, and he took pride in the way he looked. He was built like a weightlifter, with a normal-sized lower body and an immense upper torso, carrying 208 pounds on a 5'10" frame. His thick neck was perched atop mammoth shoulders and chest, the whole being supported by relatively spindly legs. The Brooklyn native had ruggedly handsome features, his innocent smile set off by 2 gold-capped front teeth that glistened in the yellow glare of fluorescent lights. A wide gap between the front teeth created a noticeable lisp when he talked. For several months, Teddy's program concentrated on only 2 things: building up Mike's stamina and his strength. Cus didn't get involved in the regime, and he wouldn't get involved until Mike Tyson became receptive to his instructions, which wouldn't happen until Cus was able to strip off all the inhibitions that had accumulated on Mike's psyche during his years in Brooklyn. Teddy worked with Mike on the basics: the speed bag to develop his hand speed and tone up his shoulder muscles, the body bag to strengthen his arms and increase his punching power, the small slip bag to improve his upper body dexterity, and the jump rope to strengthen his leg muscles and increase his stamina. A full regime of gym exercise and calisthenics was also utilised to build up the strategic areas of Mike's body. These exercises included sit-ups to tighten his stomach muscles and the wrestler's bridge to toughen his already powerful neck muscles. Mike was allowed to spar in the ring, but only on the rudiments of the sport. No fancy strategy and no boxing psychology, only straightforward boxing fundamentals. Mike's bag work included several drills on the Willie, the name given to the numbered body bag that Cus had designed many years before in the old Gramercy days. When the gym work ended, Mike headed back to the U-Old house and Cus D'Amato's other classroom. The rest of the day and the evening was spent in sessions with Cus doing most of the talking and Mike doing most of the listening. At first, Mike was a poor student. He resisted Cus's teaching completely, still very suspicious of the crazy old white dude. While Cus talked, Mike entertained himself with fanciful dreams. His mind frequently drifted off into space, absorbed into a fairy tale world of his own creation. But Cus kept plugging away. He had to make Mike realise that he too came from a ghetto neighbourhood, from the streets of the Bronx, and that he too went through years of frustrating, degrading and humiliating experiences. He tried to impress upon Mike that these early experiences could be overcome, and that all people were not as bad as Tyson suspected they were. On those occasions when Mike was particularly rude or inattentive, Cus chastised him vocally, but in private. If Mike repeated the action, Cus rebuked him in public with a reminder, "You're not back in Brooklyn now, you're in Camille's house, so behave yourself." On the surface, Mike appeared tough, but underneath, he was strangely gentle and sensitive, and whenever he had a run-in with Cus, he would flee to the arms of Camille for comfort and sympathy. The lessons continued. Mike still felt inadequate because of his limited reading ability, so in addition to his formal education, Cus engaged a tutor to come in several hours a week to work with Mike on his word skills. Cus also gave his student a number of books to read. Naturally, they dwelt on great achievers of the past, historical figures like Alexander the Great, Napoleon and Julius Caesar. However, Cus also included a book about a man that Mike could relate to more easily, baseball's black trailblazer, Jackie Robinson. Mike devoured every word and came back for more. Cus inundated young Tyson with his theories of life day after day, pounding and pounding until the teenager began to be receptive. And then the old trainer pounded some more. As with all his students, Tyson was first introduced to D'Amato's favourite subject, fear. And this is how Cus D'Amato describes fear. He says, "Fear is the greatest obstacle to learning and achievement, but fear is normal. Everyone is afraid. I know. I grew up on the streets just like you did, and I was afraid all the time, but nobody knew it. The important thing is to control fear. You have to control it, or it will kill you. Do you know the difference between being afraid and being yellow? Do you know the difference between a hero and a coward? No? Well, I'll tell you. There is no difference between a hero and a coward. They both feel the same. It's what they do that makes them different. Everybody is afraid. The coward is yellow. He doesn't face what he has to face. He runs away. But the hero faces what he has to face, even though he's afraid. Now, this is something that everybody knows, yet they don't know. They don't like to admit that. They don't like to think of themselves as being afraid. Everybody is afraid." Month after month, Mike listened quietly to Cus's monologues, without any indication of whether he understood what Cus was trying to get across. As Cus stared into Tyson's vacant eyes, he often wondered, how can I reach this kid? Does he know what I'm trying to tell him? I've got to make him realise his potential. It was very frustrating, but Cus had been through it many times before, and he was prepared for the task. He knew what was required to penetrate Tyson's shell in order to expose the real boy. It would take kindness, understanding and patience. In the end, lots and lots of patience. The discussion ended with the call for dinner, and Cus quickly made his way to the dining room to help Camille distribute the place settings. Helping with the household chores was another part of the D'Amato psychological training program. Cus placed great emphasis on teaching by example. As Mike carefully arranged the napkins beside each plate, his mind wandered aimlessly, reflecting on his recent domestication. He thought, I was just thinking to myself, all my friends in my past see me doing it, and they won't believe it. But after you do it a while, you forget about it. Just like you've been doing it all your life. In addition to Cus, Mike and Camille, dinner was usually shared with the other boxers in the house. Atlas, Rooney, Mincelli, Tom Patty and Jay Bright. Dinner was noisy in the new old household, with several conversations going on simultaneously, but the subject of all the conversations was the same: boxing. Some days Cus did not participate in the conversations, but instead sat back as an interested observer and let the boys do most of the talking. Most of the boxers jabbered away incessantly about their day at the gym, but Mike rarely got involved with these dinner-time activities, preferring to study the scene from a distance, still suspicious of the entire group, still hostile. When dinner ended, Mike quietly excused himself and stole away from the group to stroll around the lawn, trying to understand his situation, trying to put his life into perspective. One thing he was sure of, he enjoyed the solitude of being alone. When daylight disappeared, Mike quietly ascended the narrow stairway to his room to view old fight films with his new mentor and to study the strategy of past champions. He watched so many movies over the years and studied so many great fighters, thousands of them in fact, that he became a boxing trivia expert. In addition to learning how these legends of the ring thought and how they fought, he also knew all the vital statistics pertaining to their careers, how many fights they had, who they fought, what their win-loss record was. One fight that remained embedded in Mike Tyson's memory was the spectacular battle between battling Nelson and Ade Woolgast in 1910. As Mike told William Knack at Sports Illustrated, he said, "It was 40 rounds of non-stop action. I love watching Panama Al Brown. He was 116 pounds, but nearly 5'11" tall. The things he did. A guy nearly 6 foot tall, moving in and out, side to side, punching the body, bobbing and weaving." Rocky Marciano was another fighter that Mike Tyson admired. He said, "I liked Marciano's style. He broke fighters' wills. It shows great character for a man to do that." At times, Mike did feel lonely at the Catskill despite being surrounded by people. He longed for the companionship of someone he could trust. In Brooklyn, at least he had his street friends, his loving pigeons. One day, he asked Cus and Camille if he could build a pigeon coop in the backyard and stock it with a family of his feathered friends. Cus initially rejected the idea because he told his protege that he would first have to earn that privilege for his actions at home and at school. This directive from the old white man caused young Tyson to brood more and to withdraw deeper into his shell of mistrust. As fall turned to winter, the education of Mike Tyson continued unabated. Slowly, the veil of mistrust and hostility began to fade from Tyson's countenance. His personal relationship with Camille grew closer, and he began to open himself up to D'Amato's philosophy. At first, it was nothing more than an understanding of what Cus was saying. Little by little, however, a belief began to evolve that perhaps Cus D'Amato did hold the secret to success, not only in the boxing ring, but in life in general. As Tyson's attitude changed, his ability to absorb and to comprehend increased rapidly. Cus's words from the old Gramercy gym came to mind once again. "When he becomes receptive, I can begin teaching him. Once he understands everything I've said, then, and only then, do I begin teaching. If I tried to do it earlier, my words would fall off him like water off a window pane." Now, the real ring education of Mike Tyson could begin. In the early days, ring work was designed to primarily get Tyson in the best physical condition possible and to give him a working knowledge of the ring. Now that he was receptive, Cus could zero in on the strategy of the sport and begin to develop the potential of the inner man. Tyson's ring education would now incorporate Cus's unique peekaboo style of defense with an aggressive offense posture designed to entertain the fans as well as to win the fight. The new gym program also concentrated on improving Tyson's mobility and flexibility, and most important, on learning and perfecting the mental approach to the sport. Tyson arrived at the Catskill Boxing Club every day precisely at 6 p.m. Following his afternoon excursions to the boys' club, he quickly changed into his boxing gear. On entering the gym, he went through his loosening up ritual of shadow boxing for 5 or 10 minutes, then followed with some intricate rope skipping exercises to get the perspiration flowing freely. When he was thoroughly warmed up, Teddy Atlas set about taping his hands, lacing his gloves on securely and tightening the protective belt over his hips, getting him prepared to be in the ring. Cus eagerly awaited Tyson's arrival. He drilled Mike on the strategy behind the peekaboo style of defence to allow a fighter to move forward aggressively, always bobbing and weaving, exploding punches in flurry without the fear of getting hit. It was important that Tyson knew the reason for using that type of defence. In order to utilise a strategy to the fullest, a fighter must first understand the reason for it and have the utmost confidence in it. Otherwise, it's not going to work. From the beginning, Tyson was a human dynamo in the ring, a destructive force with tremendous power in either hand. He was a relentless puncher whose speed caused one expert to remark that he had the fastest hands in heavyweight history. In the initial stages of Mike Tyson's ring education, he normally worked out with Atlas or with welterweight Kevin Rooney. He was not allowed to spar for many weeks, working instead on strategy and execution. Having once been taught a particular manoeuvre, Mike would be drilled repeatedly by Teddy as Cus watched. Teddy would don the big catcher's mitts, and Mike would aim his punches at them as the two boxers moved around the ring. Mike concentrated on his defence, always under the careful scrutiny of D'Amato, who hung over the top rope yelling instructions to his young protege. 3 rounds on the speed bag followed Mike's ring work, then he slowly tapered off with some sit-ups, heavy bag work and calisthenics. Time passed quickly in the gym, as it does when you're enjoying yourself, and in a little over 2 hours, Tyson was in and out. Weeks passed by, and Tyson's progress was phenomenal, just as Cus D'Amato had predicted. As Tyson's talents exploded, the time approached where he would have to be thrust into the arena to face real opponents who would be in there to take his head off. Tyson's brain trust was already hard at work, mapping out the long-term strategy for his amateur and professional career. The brain trust consisted of D'Amato, Jim Jacobs, and Bill Caton. Jacobs and Caton owned Big Fights Inc., a New York firm that produced boxing films and documentaries. Films that over the years resulted in 2 Academy Award nominations. Jim Jacobs was well known in boxing circles, having been involved in the sport for over 20 years. In his younger days, Jacobs was a renowned handball player. He won the junior national 4-wall handball title in 1953, and between 1955 and 1960, advancing into the adult bracket. He captured 7 more national championships, 6 singles and 1 doubles. Even today, he's frequently referred to as the Babe Ruth of handball. At one time, Cus D'Amato had visions of turning Jacobs into a boxing champion, being convinced that a gifted athlete could be a champion in any sport. Jacobs' boxing career never came to pass, but he did become a protege of D'Amato's, rooming with Cus for 10 years before gravitating towards a business career in boxing. Over the years, Jim Jacobs accumulated over 26,000 fight films, estimated to be about 90% of all the fight films ever made. These include not only the professional productions of the movie studios and television networks, but also a rare collection of amateur films taken of obscure fights by ringside patrons. The amateur films produced interesting footage of many celebrated boxers in the embryonic stages of their careers, boxers like Floyd Patterson and Sugar Ray Robinson fighting in the Golden Gloves. Jacobs' film collection led to one of the most popular sports television series of the 1950s. Bill Caton, another of Tyson's managers, was weaned in the advertising business and in the late 1940s found himself creating television shows for NBC. In 1949, Caton developed a show called The Greatest Fights of the Century, and each week the show would focus on the career of one of the distinguished boxers of the 20th century and would fascinate audiences with rare film clips from some of the legendary fights. The films were from the collection of Jim Jacobs, who also narrated the fights. In 1961, Jacobs and Caton finally joined forces, forming a film production company called Turn of the Century Fights Inc. In addition to being acclaimed the world's greatest handball player, and in addition to accumulating the world's largest collection of boxing films, Jim Jacobs had one other claim to fame. Jacobs and Caton became boxing managers somewhere along the line, and in 1977 they obtained the contract of the world's junior welterweight champion, Wilfred Benitez, for a minuscule $75,000. Pretty sure that was probably one of the best bargains of that period of time. Jacobs subsequently developed a reputation as a shrewd business manager. Benitez, for example, was the only man that Sugar Ray Leonard ever fought who got a larger percentage of the purse than Leonard did. In fact, Benitez earned $7.2 million for 7 title fights over a 6-year period under Jacobs' direction. The Tyson Strategy Committee set about to bring Mike's career along very slowly and carefully. Time was on their side. After all, the boy was only 14 years old, and there was plenty of time to mould him into a world-class boxer and an eventual heavyweight champion of the world. The target date for his title shot would be sometime in 1987, when Mike Tyson would still only be 20 years old. If he were to win the title by that date, he would become the youngest heavyweight champion in boxing history, surpassing Floyd Patterson, who reached the pinnacle in 1956 at the tender age of 21 years and 11 months old. In late 1980, Mike Tyson began his climb to the top of the boxing world by fighting in smokers, those unofficial and often poorly regulated boxing matches that are still held in every metropolitan centre across the country. Mike got his baptism of fire primarily in and around the Bronx, still a hotbed of fight clubs. Teddy Atlas was training several other young boxers in addition to Tyson, and every week he piled 6 or 7 of them into the family station wagon and hauled them to New York for matches. Mike was anxious to fight. Many of the people at the Smoker Club knew who he was now, so there weren't many bets on his opponent, Jose Perez. Both boys were husky specimens, weighing about 195 pounds each. But Mike had too much talent for his older opponent and dispatched the local boy easily in the 3rd round. He followed up his first victory with 4 more smoker KOs in succession to run his record to an enviable 5-0. These bouts were an important part of Tyson's development program, but they couldn't be included in his official amateur record since they weren't sanctioned by the New York Boxing Commission. What the bouts did give the Catskill teenager was valuable experience. They provided the atmosphere that is present in all sporting events, the thrill of actual competition and the excitement of fighting before a screaming crowd of spectators. Mike also learned to adapt his fight plan to combat a variety of opponents and boxing styles. He fought big men and small men, orthodox fighters and southpaws, sluggers and runners. He fought them all, and he learned how to defeat each type of fighter. He made the usual beginner's mistakes, but his skills so far outdistanced those of his opponents that he was able to overcome his mistakes and still win comfortably. And he learned not to make the same mistake twice. Mike's early career was not all positive, however. His youth actually stifled his progress. He had matured very early at the age of 14 and had the physique of a man several years older. Despite his enormous talent, his chronological age prevented him from competing in the senior competitions such as the Empire State Games and the Golden Gloves, where the age requirement was 16. Mike had to make do as best he could in the juniors, where the competition was not up to his level. The Catskill duo took advantage of this situation to concentrate on other aspects of Mike's ring education. Teacher and student worked diligently on perfecting his mental processes, a critical weapon in a boxer's arsenal. It was this segment of the sport that D'Amato focused on. First and foremost, that lesson was given a practical demonstration one night in a smoker. The Catskill puncher fought a tough local kid. He took his best shots and refused to quit. After seeing his courageous opponent get back on his feet time and time again after seeming knocked out, the inexperienced Tyson became frustrated and discouraged. He tried to quit after the first round, claiming an injury, but trainer Teddy Atlas, realising what was happening, pushed his fighter back out for round 2. The same scenario was repeated. Tyson knocked the kid down with a devastating hook, but the youngster dragged himself upright one more time. Between rounds, a dejected Tyson told Atlas he was too tired to continue. Teddy exploded. "Get up, goddammit!" He picked Tyson up off his stool and stood him up. After struggling through the third round and winning an easy decision, a thankful Tyson recalled the words of his mentor just a few short days before. He said, "It's the ability to control your emotions that determines whether you win or lose." D'Amato and Tyson toiled relentlessly to refine Mike's mental and physical skills, but they were cautious and systematic in their approach. They were guided by a single goal: to win the heavyweight championship of the world in 1987. And they gauged their progress accordingly. Cus was very selective in choosing Mike's ring opponents, always looking for a man who could teach Mike something about one specific aspect of the sport, but a man who was not capable of beating him. As 1981 unfolded, winter turned to spring. The grass took on a mantle of deep green, and the trees blossomed with a luxuriant foliage. And Mike Tyson's career sputtered along on its turbulent course. Tyson had a deep-rooted abhorrence for authority, going back to his Brownsville days, where he had constant run-ins with both school officials and juvenile authorities. The situation was no different in Catskill, where every day was an adventure in learning for the young rebel, as well as a trial for his aged guardian. At home, Tyson was beginning to show some respect for both Camille and Cus, but at school, he was in frequent trouble. One day, he was involved in a loud altercation on the bus as it pulled into the schoolyard. Teacher John Turek quickly entered the bus, only to find himself face to face with a hostile Mike Tyson. Although no blows were struck, Tyson refused to submit to Turek's authority and was immediately suspended from school. On another occasion, Tyson threw an eraser at a teacher whose authority he rejected in the classroom, resulting in yet another suspension. Each time Mike was suspended, Lee Bordick, the principal of the Catskill Middle School, had to entertain the recommendation that Mike be permanently expelled as a disruptive influence on the class, and each time Cus D'Amato and Teddy Atlas would rush up to the school to plead their case. Fortunately, Cus always succeeded in winning a stay of execution for Mike, permitting his formal education to continue along on the rocky road of frustration and confrontation. Mike felt more comfortable in the gymnasium, and his attention was focused on the Junior Olympic National Championships to be held in Colorado Springs in June. His and Cus's primary goal for 1981 was winning that championship, which was open to boys from age 13 to 16. Even though it was early in Mike's career, it was already becoming difficult to find satisfactory sparring partners for him, so he was forced to condition himself as best he could, keeping busy with bad work and road work 7 days a week. On April the 18th of 1981, the boxing world was saddened by the passing of the ring legend Joe Louis, the Brown Bomber. He had succumbed to a heart attack after watching the Larry Holmes Trevor Burbick title fight in Caesars Palace in Las Vegas. He was 66 years old. Louis was considered by many boxing experts to have been the greatest heavyweight champion of all time. He successfully defended his title with an unprecedented 25 times over a 13-year period, finally retiring in 1949 with his crown still intact. Of course, we know that he did come back and he had a couple of more fights, and if you do want to hear more about Joe Louis's career profile, go and listen to it. Mike Tyson was another one who grieved over the loss of the Brown Bomber. Joe had been one of Mike's early heroes and a man that he hoped to emulate. In spite of the Louis tragedy, May was a big month for boxing locally as well as nationally. On May the 18th, on a Sunday afternoon, dozens of punching specialists from around the Northeast descended on Saratoga, New York, to participate in the local Junior Olympic Elimination Tournament. The kids from the Catskill Boxing Club didn't disappoint their fans as they captured gold medals in 4 of 6 events. 10-year-old Billy Ham enthralled the audience with his performance, knocking out Joe Blake in the first round. The 60-pound dynamo finished off the stubborn Blake with a right hand to the body, a trademark of D'Amato-trained fighters. Cus always drilled it into his students. Kill the body and the head will die. Ham's brilliant performance was recognised by the local tournament committee, who selected him as the event's most outstanding boxer. Several other Catskill fighters fared nearly as well as Ham. 70-pound Gary Young won over Jose Ramos, and 95-pound Maine the Flame Moore dazzled former 3-time champion Tyrone Jackson to earn a well-deserved decision. Mike Tyson won his match without working up a sweat. He was awarded the gold medal in a walkover when no opponent could be found to trade punches with the 200-pound monster. Tyson, Moore and Gary Young advanced to the regionals to be held in New York from June 12th to 14th. Billy Ham, the star of the tournament, was too young to compete. The regionals were still 4 weeks away, so the Catskill contingent kept busy by organising a tournament of their own. On Saturday, May the 23rd, Cus presented a 10-bout card in Redmond's Hall before an enthusiastic standing room crowd of 400. The excitable teenage Tyson was matched against John Shea of Beacon, and his youthful exuberance almost brought the house down, literally. Mike pummeled Shea from the start, dropping him to the canvas twice. When the referee stopped the fight without a count following a tremendous left hook to the body, the ecstatic Tyson leaped on the middle strand of the ropes and held his arms aloft in a victory salute to the home crowd. On the morning of Saturday the 13th of June, a large entourage of fighters departed from the Catskill Boxing Club and drove 130 miles to New York City, where the local boxing team would do battle with fighters from 8 states in the Junior Olympic Regionals. The combatants would compete for gold medals in 8 different weight divisions. On the line, however, was more than just a flashy medal. The winners would also qualify for a trip to Colorado to participate in the Junior Olympic National Tournament. The 2-day tournament was held in Los Battalion Hall in Queens under sizzling hot and humid June skies. It was the kind of sticky hot summer day that the police dread in crowded metropolitan melting pots like New York City. The oppressive temperatures made tempers short, resulting in a large increase in murders in the big city ghettos. 2 of the Catskill boxers, notably Mike Tyson and Gary Young, were as hot as the weather. Manny Moore won his semi-final encounter but lost in the finals. Gary Young swept through to the gold, winning the final bout with a second-round TKO over William Shang. Mike Tyson was devastating in his performance. In the semi-finals, Mike made short work of Tom French, the New England representative. He knocked French down twice, and when the outclassed heavyweight struggled to his feet after the second knockdown, a thundering uppercut finished it. The finals the following day was not much more of a challenge. The other finalist, Ira Turner, was game and determined, but he was no match for the precocious Brownsville bomber. Turner came out punching, but was stopped in his tracks almost immediately and sent crashing to the canvas twice in the opening round. A lightning right cross was the culprit both times. When Tyson picked up where he had left off in the second round, the referee quickly stepped in and stopped the fight to save Turner from further unnecessary punishment. Mike Tyson was king of the East. 3 weeks after the tournament, Mike and his trainer, Teddy Atlas, departed Albany on a jumbo jet and headed for the mountainous climbs of Colorado. The flight to Denver was Mike's first experience with long-distance travel to a fight location. It was another aspect of boxing that the fighter had to master: how to overcome jet lag and time zone change, and how to adapt to a new locality and a new hotel in a world of strangers. The inconveniences of travelling were not difficult obstacles for the youngster, as it turned out, and his ring performance did not suffer at all. Tyson's major opponent in Colorado was his emotions. He tried hard to keep himself under control, but at 14 years of age, that task was virtually impossible. Mike was still an excitable fighter, with all the advantages and disadvantages that such a state brings. The emotional highs were sky high and the lows were depressing. Cus D'Amato and Teddy Atlas constantly worked on Tyson's state of mind, trying to teach him to remain detached during a match, to maintain a calm demeanour in all situations. It was a quality that Tyson would master by the time he turned professional, but in 1981, he was still too young and immature. He put a lot of pressure on himself early in his career by making winning a life or death struggle each time. He was always edgy before a fight, which is normal, but he carried it to extremes. At times, he almost worked himself into a frenzy by fight time, a condition that not only destroyed his concentration, but sapped his energy as well. Fortunately, Mike's talent was so much greater than that of his amateur opponents that he could still overcome a multitude of mistakes and still win. Tyson and Atlas landed at Stapleton International Airport in Denver on a bright June day and immediately took an airport limousine to the United States Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, some 70 miles south. Colorado was breathtaking in mid-June. Everything was green and blossoming, and the Rocky Mountains rose majestically in the distance, the snow-topped Pikes Peak glistening in the midday sun. The pre-fight workouts were intense but stimulating. By contrast, the evenings were relaxing in the pleasant surroundings of the Air Force Academy. Classes were out for the summer, and the Junior Olympics had the run of the entire campus. As a result, Mike and Teddy were able to enjoy the comfort of a spacious private room in one of the student dormitories. They could entertain themselves during the free time by attending the local movie theatre or enjoying the extensive canteen facilities. They could stroll around the campus enjoying the spectacular beauty of the western landscape, or they could just sit in the room and talk. For the most part, Mike kept his mind on the upcoming fights, of which there were 3, beginning with the quarterfinals. On Wednesday, June the 24th, Mike Tyson stepped into the ring for the first time. There were 3 rings in the vast academy complex, and Mike's match was the 20th match in the ring number 3. It began 3 hours after the start of the programme, and for a 14-year-old, the long wait was just sheer torture. The Catskill fighter spent most of the time nervously pacing the hallways and outside the perimeter of the fieldhouse like a greyhound waiting for the gates to open. His nerves were completely frazzled by the time his match was finally announced, but he took a deep breath and regained his composure before entering the arena to do battle. By the time he climbed through the ropes, he projected an air of confidence and determination to the spectators, although inside his stomach churned with terror. When the bell sounded for the start of the fight, Mike stalked his opponent, Jesse Esparza of Lindsay, California, like a starving predator, backing him immediately into the ropes. A crunching body shot to the liver dropped Esparza to the canvas for the full count. The fight was over, almost before it had even began, leaving many patrons still searching for the seats. The official time was 30 seconds. After the fight, Tyson admitted, "There was a lot of tension, and I was really nervous. I really did not have that many fights behind me, and to come this far was pretty mind-boggling." The next day, Mike's semi-final encounter was the 16th match in ring number 2. Again, the waiting preyed on the youngster's mind, and he entered the ring, nervous and agitated. His adversary, a 260-pound Texan named Randy Wesley, gave his best macho performance during the referee's instructions as he tried to stare down the New York teenager. But Tyson would have none of it. He'd been trained by D'Amato to ignore such theatrics by his opponent, so he returned Wesley's stare with a menacing scowl of his own. When the fight started, Mike was ready and waiting, and Wesley fared no better than Esparza. Both fighters answered the bell quickly and met in the centre of the ring. Wesley threw several rights and lefts. Tyson slipped the punches easily and then countered with a thundering left under the jaw, ending the contest at the 40-second mark. Friday was an off day for the Junior Olympics, so many of the participants took advantage of a guided tour of the area. They visited the Pioneers Museum in Colorado Springs and the famous Mineral Springs in Manitou. They studied the grotesque sandstone rock for formations in the Garden of the Gods, and then they motored into the mountains to obtain a better view of the 14,109-foot Pikes Peak. Others, like Mike Tyson and Teddy Atlas, stayed at the academy and spent a peaceful day away from the noise, the tension, and the violence of the competition, relaxing and enjoying the academy's facilities. Saturday rolled around soon enough, and a large crowd pushed their way into the field house as soon as the doors were opened. Most of them had come to see the new boxing sensation from the East, Mike Tyson, whose reputation as a slugger was already established in Colorado Springs and whose early performances had made him the hometown favourite in the finals. As soon as the fighters entered the ring, the bloodthirsty fans began screaming for a Tyson knockout. Mike didn't disappoint them. His opponent, Joe Cortez, was not intimidated by the reception. He had come to fight, and when the round began, he rushed from his corner and threw 2 wicked hooks in Tyson's direction. Mike bobbed and weaved, slipping both punches, and then leaped in with a right hook of his own that ended the fight at the 10-second mark. Cortez's face twisted in agony as he slumped to the canvas, motionless. The immense power behind the punch brought a gasp from the stunned crowd. Tyson himself summarised the fight pretty well at the post-fight interview. He said, "The guy came at me really fast and tried to catch me off balance, but I slipped under his first flurry of punches and stopped him quick." Pat Knapp, the United States Olympic boxing coach, was in the stands for the entire tournament, and like most of the other boxing experts who spent the week in Colorado, he came away very much impressed with the young heavyweight champion. He said, "Tyson is a tremendous prospect. It's hard to believe he's only 14 years old. He has the physique and skills of a man 6 years older. He is fast and smart and has great power in both hands. He is a definite contender for the 1984 Olympic team." Mike Tyson and Teddy Atlas were on cloud 9 for several days after the Junior Olympics. Euphoria set in following Mike's quick victory and turned their world into a surrealistic landscape where everything was shadowy and dreamlike. The two men were still in a daze when they deplaned in Albany, and the sight that greeted them in the Catskill compounded the situation. A large banner waved in the breeze over Main Street, placed there by a grateful board of selectmen. It read, "Welcome home champs Teddy and Mike, Junior Olympic champs." Although Teddy was Mike's trainer, he was not much more than a boy himself. He was only 24 years old and still very emotional. It was Cus D'Amato's job to bring Teddy and Mike down to earth and put them back on track again. "Remember," Cus said, "control your emotions. You must not get too high or too low. You must stay detached to reach your maximum potential." Maybe it was still too early for a 14-year-old to remain detached. Maybe it was difficult for Tyson to accept his new celebrity status without suffering some minor emotional problems. Be that as it may, he was jerked back to reality in his next fight. Mike was matched with a 20-year-old named Anthony Burnett from Rhode Island, an older, more experienced, more seasoned boxer than Mike had encountered in Colorado. This was Burnett's last bout before turning professional, and he made the most of it. He gave Tyson a good boxing lesson for 3 rounds and came away with a close decision. Mike was back in the real world once again, but he was not depressed by the setback. He realised that it was another profitable learning experience and that it was just another step forward in his development process. As he told the Daily Mail, "Burnett was tough, smart and fast. The lack of experience really hurt me against him, but I learnt a lot from fighting him." Cus D'Amato put Tyson back in the ring in the blink of an eye against another experienced older fighter. This time Mike was on track and he won a 3-round decision against Rick Melton of Albany. Even with his ring successes, Mike Tyson was still struggling to find his identity. He was unsure of where he fit into society, and he was confused as to where his home was and where his roots were. Were they in Catskill or were they in Brooklyn? Periodically, when the doubts became too much for him to handle, Mike would disappear from Catskill without telling anyone where he was going. But Cus and Camille knew. They knew he was on his way back to Brooklyn, but they also knew he would return to them once he fought things out. Mike did go to Brooklyn. He went to visit his family and to see all his friends from the old gang. But he never stayed more than 2 weeks. He always found it depressing to return to the life he once knew. His mother, Lorna, who had been the backbone of the family when Mike was a child, began to drink after her man deserted her. She was now a hopeless alcoholic. She was also suffering from stomach cancer and had less than 18 months to live. His brother Rodney had enlisted in the Navy by this time and was seldom home anymore, and the burden of running the household had fallen on Mike's 16-year-old sister, Denise. Mike enjoyed seeing his buddies again, and he even participated in a street hold-up for old time's sake. The thrill of living on the edge was still there, but so was the promise of punishment. Every time Mike went back to Brownsville, there were fewer and fewer friends to greet him. One by one they disappeared. One died in a knife fight, another was in prison for armed robbery. One former Tyson associate, barely out of his teens and strung out on drugs, gave the Catskill boxer the benefit of his mistakes. "I'm dying, man. The drugs are killing me, and I can't stop. It's too late for me, but not for you. Stay away from drugs, or you'll kill yourself." Mike left town quickly, returning to the safety of upstate New York. His home was now in Catskill, but his heart would always be in Brooklyn. On a warm October evening, the Catskill Boxing Club journeyed to East Greenbush for another of their frequent boxing competitions. Manny the Flame Moore took on Tracy Harris from Floyd Patterson's New Paltz Boxing Gym, and Moore ground out a 3-round decision. Next on the card was the likeable Frank Mincelli, who also won a 3-round decision. As a matter of fact, he almost pulled off a first-round knockout, but his excitable nature betrayed him and the opportunity slipped through his fingers. Mincelli came out fast and caught Don Papanol with a left hook early in the fight, a punch that completely paralysed the youngster. The nervous New Yorker lost his poise, however, in his anxiety to win the fight, and Papanol survived. In round 2, the tables were turned as the boy from the New Paltz dominated and almost KO'd Mincelli in a magnificent comeback. To Frankie's credit, he withstood the onslaught and actually won round 3 to take a close decision. Mike followed Frankie into the ring, fighting yet another old pro. This time, the opponent was Andy Robitelli of Vermont, the country's number 3 ranked amateur heavyweight. Tyson was in peak condition for this fight, both mentally and physically. He moved like a lightweight and his punches were sharp and crisp, snapping Robitelli's head back every time they made contact. The Vermont fighter, realising he'd lost the first 2 rounds, tossed caution to the winds in round 3 and tried for a knockout. Tyson managed to fend off his flurries without much difficulty and came away a decision winner to keep the Catskill Boxing Club's perfect record intact. Mike Tyson was now beginning to feel more comfortable with the other members of the gym, and he began to enjoy the social aspect of the gym as well as the training. Over the previous 12 months, he had developed several close relationships at the Catskill Boxing Club, not only with Cus and Teddy, but with other boxers like Kevin Rooney and John Chetty. Chetty, 3 years older than Mike, was something of an advisor to his younger companion. Anytime Mike had a problem, particularly a problem associated with growing teenagers, girl problems, that sort of thing, he always went to Chetty for advice. If his problems were more of a serious nature, he sought out the old folks, Teddy and Cus. Mike's circle of friends included many who were not members of the gym. In addition to John Chetty, he enjoyed the company of Teddy, Jay Bright and Mike Murphy. Murphy's younger brother Jim and Chetty's younger brother Chris stayed close to the older boys, thrilled to be able to associate with their heroes. One fall night in late 1981, the Chettys invited young Tyson to dine with them at the local Chinese restaurant. It turned out to be an embarrassing exercise in etiquette from the boy from Brooklyn, but all part of the growing process. As the meal progressed, it became apparent that Mike had never eaten in a restaurant before. He ordered spare ribs and immediately tried to carve them up with a knife and fork. John Chetty told Mike it was okay to eat the spare ribs with his fingers. But young Tyson frowned on that suggestion. "Oh no, I can't do that. Camille told me never to eat food with my fingers." The situation went downhill from there. After everyone had finished the meal, a Chinese waiter cleared away the plates and brought a bowl of fortune cookies to the table. Before anyone could stop him, Mike snatched one of the crisp little delicacies from the bowl, popped the whole thing into his mouth, and began to chew away. No, he was told, you don't eat the whole thing. There's a paper fortune inside the cookie. First you have to break it open and take out the fortune before you eat the cookie. An embarrassed Mike Tyson quickly recovered the soggy paper and discarded it. During Tyson's early years of amateur competition, he spent most of his time in the gym perfecting his boxing style, developing new tactics and working on the proper mental approach to the sport. Official bouts were of secondary importance to him and Cus at this stage of his development, but he still managed to fight every other month. The learning process and the drills were primary. After he turned professional, experience became primary, and his ring activity increased significantly, with a fight every 2 to 3 weeks. But for now, it was school time in the gym, with Cus and Teddy giving Mike a new lesson every day, while at the same time refining and improving his basic talents. During his first year on the circuit, Mike had amassed a record of 6-0 in smokers with 5 KOs, plus an official amateur mark of 8-1 with 6 KOs. Cus D'Amato was satisfied with his protege's progress as an amateur, and he told the press what they might expect from the adolescent gladiator in the future. He said, "Mike has all the tools to reach every goal we set for him. He has drive, ambition and skills. All he needs is time, experience and more experience." People in the sports world were beginning to take notice of Tyson now, and reporters occasionally stopped by Redmond's Hall for an interview with the new phenom. Cus permitted interviews to some extent, as long as they didn't distract Mike from his primary objective, boxing. Tyson enjoyed fighting, but his interviews showed the world that he wasn't just one-dimensional. Now it's at this moment, ladies and gentlemen, we will break off for the end of part 1 of the Mike Tyson career profile. There is so much more to cover. We've not even got into his professional career yet. We've not even finished his amateur career yet. And there's so many other stories, some pivotal moments that we have covered in other episodes pertaining to Mike Tyson. So I hope you've enjoyed this first part. I hope it's given you more of an insight into Mike's upbringing, Mike's background into boxing, and all the nuances that I never knew about. Now, don't get me wrong, I've read Mike Tyson's book and I've read a lot of his literature. There's so many different books on him out there. And I remember a lot of things that were said about him from this period of time. But going over some of these things again just reminds me of how much of a journey Mike Tyson has been on throughout his life and his boxing career. And I'm really happy that we've decided to do this again for you guys, from the original one not being nowhere near like this is, and of course the remaining parts of the Mike Tyson career profile. If you've enjoyed this part 1, if it's given you the appetite for parts 2, 3, 4 and 5, then please always make sure you leave a comment. If you're on Spotify listening, you know what to do. Leave a comment, let me know your thoughts and feelings on it. A lot of you out there that listen to the show are Mike Tyson fans, so you probably know his career, his life inside and out. There's probably things that maybe we might not even cover that you might be able to tell me about it. But the whole point of us doing this again is to give us a definitive version, a definitive BTR version of Mike Tyson's career profile, as opposed to what we previously did many years ago. And I hope that you've enjoyed it. As always, if you have, you can let me know. If you're listening on a different application or you've listened via YouTube, please make sure you do leave a comment below in the comments box about the episode. And I do hope you're going to be coming back for the follow-up parts to Mike Tyson's career profile. For those that have been listening through Patreon, thank you so much. I hope you've enjoyed early access to this episode, and of course early access to the future parts for the Mike Tyson career profile. But that is it for this one. I will be back very soon with part 2. Thank you so much for listening to Mike Tyson's career profile, part number 1 on the Career Profiles podcast, part of the BTR Boxing Podcast Network.